Welcome. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Taryn Bragdon, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Maine Heritage Policy Center. The Maine Heritage Policy Center wrote the Question 4 legislation this year, as well as the Tabor legislation back in 2006. It was on the ballot and was narrowly defeated. I'm very excited to be here today with the Coalition for Change, and you will hear directly from some people who were opposed to the Tabor ballot question in 2006, but today are supporting it because they recognize the new legislation is much needed to control spending and future tax increases. I want to just quickly highlight some of the differences between the 2006 legislation and Question 4 on the 2009 ballot. First, the 2006 legislation required a 2/3 vote to go over the spending limits or to increase taxes of either local government or of the legislature. And some folks were concerned with that supermajority requirement. And so that 2/3 requirement is not in this Question 4 legislation. Instead, we just require a simple majority vote of the voters for tax increases or big spending increases. Secondly, in 2006, local education was controlled by the Tabor inflation plus population growth limit. As you'll hear in just a moment from former State Senator Carl Turner, the education spending is outside this current Question 4 Tabor because the legislature passed a law that requires all education budgets to go out to a vote. And so education spending, despite what you're hearing from the ads, is in no way impacted by Question 4. And lastly, the big difference between the 2006 legislation and this year is it's much more explicit that Tabor never causes a budget cut. Instead, it allows for reasonable growth of government spending every year. And if voters want to have bigger spending increases, they can approve those spending increases. So it's much more explicit about never requiring cuts. You know, sometimes I'm asked, why is Question 4 Tabor so needed? And why is a yes vote on 4 so important today? And I think we need to look no further than the big increases in government spending at the state and local level just over the last year alone, when Maine was in the worst recession in generations. Last year, property taxes across this state increased $100 million, 5.5%, at a time that tens of thousands of Mainers were thrown out of their jobs or had their paychecks reduced. State spending went up 7.4% from last year to this year, much of it funded by one-time federal money that will become permanent state tax increases to sustain that big increase going forward. And so for us and the Coalition for Change, Question 4, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, is needed now more than ever because state and local spending and tax increases still are out of control. We've seen $300 million in tax increases since 2006 alone. And a yes vote on Question 4 will allow taxpayers to have the final word on future spending increases or future tax increases. Yesterday we released some polling showing us at 47% support with 8% undecided. And I think it's important to note that a big change from 2006 at the same point in the campaign is that we are 8 points higher in the poll, even though last time we were narrowly defeated with just 4% of the vote. We received 46% of the vote. So we are much stronger, have a higher level of support from Maine taxpayers and voters, and we're excited to be part of the Coalition for Change that really means permanent change for Maine's taxpayers and for our economic prosperity. I'd like to introduce at this time former State Senator Carl Turner from Cumberland, who will talk to you about why he was opposed to Tabor in 2006 and why he's supporting the Taxpayer Bill of Rights Question 4 in 2009. Senator?
Well, good morning. If I reflect back, in 2004 we had a tax cap proposition. I opposed that. In 2006 we had what I thought was a very draconian Tabor offering, and I opposed that. There were three things in the 2006 offering that I was very troubled with. The supermajority being central to that. Can't hear me? Well, I'll try to talk louder. The supermajority was problematic for me. It was quite picayune at the municipal level. If you wanted to increase a tax or a fee by as little as $4 to $5, say on a dog tag, we've had to take that to the voters. So I thought it was going to be something that would be very troubling and difficult for municipalities to deal with by taking everything to the ballot box. Then the third provision that Taryn touched upon was the so-called ratchet down provision. That was in 2006. There is no ratchet down provision in the current taper offering before the voters, although the opponents like to think of it and categorize it as having a ratchet down provision. It actually does not. So those three things are dramatically different, 2006 versus 2009. When I was on the Appropriations Committee, we had a organization or a subgroup of 4 of us who looked at school funding, and working with the governor, we actually took school funding and made it subject to voter approval, and that's been in place now for a couple of years. It seems to be working quite well, so those who tell you that this version of TABOR is somehow going to affect schools and school funding, I think are just flat out wrong. They're using this script from 3 years ago. I think there is no good time or bad time to impose restrictions of limitations on growth and spending. It's been an old adage that government's use of our funds should grow no faster than our pocketbooks. This, I think, will allow that to happen. I know the polls are very close and there are still undecided voters. I would encourage everybody to look at this carefully. I'm casting my vote in favor of TABOR 2. Any questions I've got to try to answer? Thank you.
Another group who was opposed to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights back in 2006 but is now supporting it is the Androscoggin County Chamber of Commerce. And Chip Morrison, who had a scheduling conflict at last minute, provided me with a statement that he wanted me to read to clearly articulate why this second largest regional chamber in the state is supporting question 4. First, Chip says, we believe question 4 is more sensible and effective than the 2006 proposal. And he articulates their concerns about the 2/3 vote that Senator Turner just mentioned. Secondly, we believe that our government has failed to enact meaningful fiscal reforms, as many people were promised if they voted no back in 2006. Although the legislature and many local governments have reduced expenditures, those actions were the result of a declining economy, Chip says. Had revenues grown as they had in prior years, we have no reason to believe that government spending wouldn't have increased even more. Today, the Androscoggin County Chamber of Commerce is confident question 4 will make the changes in spending and taxing that will result in long-term positive changes in Maine's fiscal well-being. And lastly, the Androscoggin County Chamber supports the additions to question 4 that were not present in 2006, specifically in additional transparency in government. The uniform budgeting and reporting requirements for all local governments will lead to more accurate comparisons of how one town spends compared to another, enabling a better system of benchmarks in place. Quite simply, the Androscoggin County Chamber of Commerce has reversed its position because it is time for a change. Question 4 will create those changes that will limit increases in government spending so that spending will remain in line with our ability to pay. So the Androscoggin County Chamber of Commerce joins the Coalition for Change in now supporting question 4, even though they were opposed to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights back in 2000.